We acknowledge that the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society gathers on the unceded land of the Western Abenaki people. The Abenaki have had a sacred relationship with this land and its waters for thousands of years. We honor the humanity, culture, and traditions of the Abenaki and all indigenous peoples, living traditions that survive despite the atrocities that began with the religious colonial conquest 600 years ago. We celebrate Abenaki culture and art not by appropriation or attempts of assimilation, but for what it is, honorable expressions of a courageous, self-determined people who are still here and remain resilient in the face of systemic inequities. We are committed to becoming a truly just, multicultural community of communities in which all are healed, all are free, and all are loved. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Welcome to everyone in this virtual space on this snowy day. Wasn't that music by Chuck Miller during the prelude wonderful? Absolutely. Yes. Welcome to this gathering of the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society, where we celebrate the interdependence, diversity, and radical plurality of all being. If you're a visitor in this space with us today, a special welcome to you. If we were in person, I would ask you to consider filling out one of our blue visitors cards. Today, Mary will be putting an electronic version of that form into chat for you to consider completing so that we can stay in touch. We also hope everyone will stay on after the service for a virtual social hour. I am Tom Morgan, currently serving in a community ministry internship based from CVUUS. And before I go any further, I have to express our gratitude to the extraordinary tech team, particularly Mary Hadley, our Zoom host, Margy Young, our videocaster, Liam Battjes-Greenwood, our gatherer, Richard Hopkins, and so many others. Thank you for the generous, graceful way you have worked to adapt our service for this virtual platform today. Thank you so much. As today's worship associate, it is my honor to welcome teacher, co-conspirator for justice, and the friend of many here, Joshin Byrnes, as our guest worship leader this morning. Sensei Joshin Byrnes is the guiding teacher at Breadloaf Mountain Zen community, where he applies Zen to personal and social suffering. His engaged practice includes Gather, the community living room, Street Greens, the Zen Peacemaker Quilt Project, and most recently, Neighbors Grove, a supporting transitional low-income housing initiative in Middlebury. Now let that sink in for a minute. Recognizing rising isolation and disconnection among our neighbors, Joshin and Breadloaf responded by creating a thriving community living room. Facing obstacles to maintaining communal dining space during COVID, they continued care, connection, and feeding neighbors by reaching out in a food truck. Seeing the lack of affordable supportive housing, Joshin and Breadloaf financed and launched a transitional housing opportunity for some of our most vulnerable neighbors. What amazing expressions of love-centric values in action. Joshin previously served as president and vice abbot of Upaya Zen Center and led the Upaya chaplaincy program. From 2003 to 2008, he was president and CEO of the Vermont Community Foundation and an active member in CVUUS, where he taught in the OWL program and accompanied the coming of age group to New Orleans for the rebuilding effort after Hurricane Katrina. And before his work in philanthropy and Zen, Joshin worked for 15 years in the AIDS epidemic in Boston and San Francisco. Earlier in life, he trained in the Dominican order, shaping his lifelong commitments to contemplation and action. Joshin, welcome back. As Amaya lights our chalice, Please join me in reading this morning's chalice lighting, written by the Reverend Lisa Garcia Sampson. In these wild, historic, and uncertain times, we gather to remember who we are, who we belong to, and what we are called to do. As we light this chalice, we kindle the spirit of the great turning, the movement for justice alive in this nation today. May we feel it in our bones and in the stillness of the hour. May we sense it calling our name. Our call to worship today is entitled Coming Up for Air by Mark Nepo. The times are hard and unexpected. They always are. But the river of being that carries us is always life-giving, if we can reach it. This, as ever, requires diving where we are, not running from what is. We must be brave and must be aware, mostly of ourselves. For the mind is like a spider. It will weave many webs. But the heart is like an arrow of light. It will pierce a hole in the dark that life will fill. Along the way, we stumble in the dark. Our fierce and tender honesty is the lamp we swing before us. Now I would like to welcome our acting religious exploration coordinator, Julia Santeri, for our time for all ages. Julia?
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well this morning in the snow. I have not a picture book today, but I have a guided story meditation from this book, Nightlights, which is by a variety of authors, actually. And so you hopefully are already comfortable, but if not, make sure you're extra comfy. Maybe roll your shoulders, stretch your arms out, get in a comfortable position. Okay, take a deep breath. Let it out as loudly or quietly as you want to, and just listen. This is an ancient oak tree. Close your eyes and breathe deeply, in and out, in and out. Listen to the sighing, whispering sound you make as you breathe out. It's like a sound of the wind whistling through the leaves of a tree. Now pick up your magic lantern and walk down the enchanted path. Where will it lead you today? The whispering grows louder, and you find yourself at the bottom of a huge old oak tree. But the leaves that are blowing in the wind aren't on the tree. They're on the ground all around you, dry and brown, swishing back and forth, dancing and tumbling. Standing there with the tree all bare, you start to wish it was spring and not winter. The tree is ancient, more than 500 years old. As it sways gently in the wind, you listen carefully. Yes, it really does seem to be whispering to you. Look at the beautiful shapes of my branches, it murmurs. Look at the lovely lacy patterns my twigs make against the sky. You sit back against the great knobbly tree trunk and feel safe and happy. Now you open your eyes. Everything has changed. The tree is covered in bright leaves. Birds flutter in the branches. The sun glimmers everywhere, making quick-moving shadows all around you. Now the world seems so bright and busy, you almost long for the thick greenery of summer to come and shade you from the dazzling sun. Again, the tree seems to whisper to you. Look at all the new life in my branches, the leaves unfurling and the birds' eggs hatching. All that activity begins to make you feel tired and your eyelids start to droop. When you open your eyes again, you're in cool green shade. Everything is green. But as soon as you start to wish for more colors, the old tree is whispering to you once again. Feel how peaceful it is. Now there's nothing to do but sit back and wait for the seeds to ripen. The warmth of the summer sun makes you fall fast asleep. Now the wind's blowing through the leaves once more. This time it whistles and howls. Wide awake, you think at first that the tree's on fire. It's ablaze with colors, red and gold and copper, and rocking like a ship in a storm. Ripe acorns drop at your feet. You pick one up and look at it closely. It could be a tiny golden egg in an egg cup. You don't need the tree to tell you how lovely it is now. You can see it for yourself. But again, you hear the whispering. Every season is wonderful, it says. Enjoy each one. Take the acorn and plant it. Be patient, because it will take many springs and summers, autumns and winters, to become a tall tree like me. Now, in your mind, plant the acorn. Do you think your tree will live for 500 years? What seeds will your tree grow?
Thank you, Julia. What seeds indeed. So we've come to the point in our service of pathways to connection. Now, we certainly are living in times of needing authentic, liberating connection. And during this Black History Month in particular, I am reminded of what civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer said clearly: nobody is free until everybody is free. And in our community of communities, we have many ways to connect with each other and with the expanding opportunities to connect in our broader community. First, stay tuned to our weekly blast for the date of our rescheduled contra dance that had to be canceled due to weather and illness. Also, if you've been following Mid-Pride and Elio Farley, you might know that there's a anti-trans speaker coming to Middlebury College on Thursday, February 20th from 5 to 6:30 p.m., sponsored by a member of the college's political science department. Elio and Mid-Pride are planning an alternative faculty panel discussion and a dance party as counter programming. So please watch Elio's Mid-Pride social media, Front Porch Forum in Middlebury, and just reach out to Elio maybe for details on the plans. They're still in the works. So CVUUS can show up in support with our Unitarian Universalist love-centric selves. This coming Friday, February 21st, is game night at CVUUS with dinner at 6 and games to follow. The Sponheimer family has generously offered to host a potato bar, and you are welcome to bring other dishes and desserts. Please contact Mike Greenwood or Liam Battjes-Greenwood by Wednesday if you would like to participate. On Saturday, February 22nd, from 11 to 1, Migrant Justice and 350 Vermont will be conducting an information and training session at CVUUS around what you can do to ally with and help provide sanctuary for our migrant neighbors in Vermont. The registration link for this event is in the weekly blast, and I think the tech team just put it into our chat as well. Thank you. We are blessed to have Dr. Francois Clemens leading a singing circle in the Ann Ross Fellowship Hall on Thursday, February 27th at 5:30. That will certainly be an event of joy, and aren't we in need of some events of joy? Thank you, Francois. Folks, Alan Moore has highlighted an opportunity to step up in support of our unhoused neighbors sheltered at Charter House by helping prepare and serve meals. CVUUS has been providing meals for the guests at Charter House for the last 15 years, and I can say as someone who worked there, those meals have not only provided relief for the exhausted staff, but it has also demonstrated a generosity of presence, connecting with community members who need and appreciate the dignifying act of showing up and showing that we care. Please reach out to Alan for more information on how to help. Also, please mark your calendars for CVUUS's Social Justice Ministry Breakfast Workshop on Saturday, March 8th. The Bagel Breakfast will be the first in a series of opportunities. This one, we will discuss the current context of increasing marginalization and disenfranchisement in our community of communities, and workshop around the UU Valued Collective of Ministry for Justice. Please stay tuned for more details. Now I would like to turn it over to Jordan Young and Heidi Sulis to talk about CVUUS's Roots and Wings campaign. And as they are doing that, please feel free to add your milestones and passages into chat so we can review those. Thank you. Over to you, Jordan.
Thanks, Tom. I was reflecting when John Barstow asked me to sort of look back on almost a lifetime of being a Unitarian Universalist, and as to what were the moments that really sort of formed who I am and how those have echoed through my life. I came to Unitarian Universalism as a teenager, although in the moment I didn't know that that's what it was. It was 1972. We were at Star Island, a UU conference and retreat center off the coast of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, for those who don't know it. And in the week that we spent there, I found acceptance and support both from my fellow teenagers and from adults, an acceptance and support that I had never experienced before. I didn't know it at the time, and I certainly couldn't have articulated it, but what I experienced were the UU principles in at least 1 week's worth of living. Respect for my teenage forming self as having inherent worth, compassion for my faults and foibles, and encouragement to seek the truth as I could understand it. When I asked Margy's family, who had invited me to Star Island, where I could find more of this, they suggested I join Margy and her brother John at youth group on Sunday nights. The Reverend Fred Ward was the youth minister. He one extraordinary teacher among the many extraordinary souls attracted to UU religious education. Margy and I formed a deep bond with him. He ended up being the minister who married us, as a matter of fact. I have no doubt that much of what is best in me was uncovered and brought to light and nurtured in those years at LRY, the Liberal Religious Youth, and on Sunday mornings, all during my high school years. Two experiences stand out even across the gulf of half a century. Somehow, I don't know how, Fred and the UU Church in Princeton were selected to beta test the UUA's new sexuality education curriculum, at that time called About Your Sexuality. It was a remarkably progressive curriculum for its repressive day, with topics like gender, relationships, and intimacy, as well as traditional sex ed topics like anatomy. It even had film strips. Anybody remember film strips? I want to see some old people. The film strips were a way of depicting heterosexual and homosexual intimacy in, again, ways that were both informative and candid, that just people didn't do that in the 1970s. I also remember, just in terms of the larger social context, that after the unit on contraception, as an afterthought, Fred held up the condom that he'd been using as a teaching aid and said, "Oh, by the way, I just violated New Jersey law. It's illegal to possess a contraceptive with the intent to show it to someone else." That was one of the Comstock laws, which many of which are still on the books, that many of us thought were historical revenants, and yet here they are, relevant today. So what I learned at AYS and About Your Sexuality was the fundamental, stable, affirming base on which all of my exploring and struggles with sexuality and gender occurred. With that bedrock, I was safe to seek an understanding of myself and my place in the world. So it should come as no surprise that when the Our Whole Lives curriculum became available in the year 2000, I jumped at the chance to pay forward the benefits I had received from AYS, to pay that forward to future OWL participants. I know that OWL has been important to many CVUUS youth who have experienced it, and that it's changed some of their lives. But sometimes it's the little things that happen in a church, in religious education, that have the most lasting effect. So the youth group used to hold conferences. We'd get youth from about 150 youth from other churches in the area, and we'd all get together at different churches around the area for a given weekend. So we were planning one of those, and we were contemplating our Saturday night menu, which was usually spaghetti or lasagna or something which you could easily do for 150 people. One aspiring chef in our group said, "Hey, how about ham and turkey? We have this great church kitchen that we could use." Fred was really skeptical. He had shepherded a number of these conferences in his career. But after a few minutes conversation, he concluded with, "Well, if you think you can pull it off, it's your conference." We did pull it off, and our aspiring chef did indeed go on to be a professional chef before his life was cut short by AIDS. So you wouldn't think that, like, well, if you can pull it off would be a life-changing comment. But for me, it was, because it encapsulated the empowerment and the self-determination that characterized the UU approach to self and others and to empowering teens. So cut to half a century later, when I was sitting in a social work class at UVM, and the professor, sort of as we were, it was one of our early classes, and the professor was sort of trying to bring us together as a group and assured us that we were the kind of people who others like to confide in and who others come to, which is why we're in social work school, which didn't exactly feel like me. I mean, I'm honored by those things when they happen, but it wasn't my underlying motivation. And I realized that what brought me to social work school, what caused me to want to connect with people, was the ability to empower others, particularly to empower teenagers around their own sexuality and gender. All those years later, I realized that Fred's chance comment, his comment about, well, if you can do that, you know, it's your conference, that we had the power to do that. His faith in us as teens had shaped my life and my desire to make sure that others felt that same sense of empowerment. So that philosophy and that goal around empowering people was the guiding principle I held on to during the 5 years that I was a high school clinical counselor. And that's the magic, I think, that happens at a UU church. We raise empowered children who become youth who will change the world for the better. We can't do that without a building and programs and volunteers and all the other things that are the physical manifestations of a church community. I'm grateful that the UU Church in Princeton was there for me as a teen, and that CVUUS was here for me and for our children as we continue to grow and change. And I think this is the moment when Heidi is going to tell you how we're going to continue to do that and run the programs that allow us to touch other lives the way my life and the life of my family was touched. Heidi.
Thank you, Jordan. That was lovely. Good morning, everyone from snowy Vermont. It's so nice to see people joining from across the country, Michigan, Maryland, Florida. I just want to share a quick update about our campaign so that we can continue to forge ahead with a strong foundation beneath us. And it's really wonderful news to share at this point. Thus far, we have raised $621,670 for the capital side of our campaign. We are already at a strong 71%, which blows me away, quite frankly, honestly. And for our annual budget campaign, for our pledging, we're at 140,644, or 43% of our goal. So I just want to express on behalf of the team, the group of visiting stewards, and all of you who are so generously opening up yourselves, your hearts, to stay committed to CVUUS. It's been very gratifying to witness and see, and so thank you from all of us. And I think a number of us have had rich conversations with congregants, some of whom we're just getting to know for the first time, which I think is a big piece of why we're doing this and having these one-on-ones. So for those of you who haven't been visited yet, I encourage you to answer the phone or respond to your text and take us up on going out for a cup of coffee or coming to our home to get to know you and talk about our shared aspirations and what we want CVUUS to be going forward. So thank you so much. And now I believe it's back to Tom and the offering.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Jordan. That was fantastic and wonderful and very impressive. So, yes, we are so blessed to have not only allies, but but also, co-conspirators for justice and equity in this community of communities. Our offering today will benefit one of our core community ministry partners, Turning Point of Addison County. Turning Point provides peer-based addiction recovery support from a place of lived experience and genuine empathy. They turn no one away. They see no one as an outsider, and they share our commitment to building stronger relationships. It has been our honor to establish and co-host Queerly Beloved, our supportive gathering for LGBTQ+ community members with Turning Point here at CVUUS on Thursday nights since last August. So please give as generously as you can by using the QR code on the screen or the website that's been typed into chat. As you're So now we've reached the point of milestones and passages. And if you noticed in your chat, Jenny shared that Jeanette Lampron, a longtime member of CVUS and a summer resident, recently has been diagnosed with breast cancer and has begun treatment. So thoughts and prayers for Jeanette. Also, Reverend Johanna is remembering Debbie Wing of Lake Dunmore, former member of CVUS who died on January 31st. Liam points out that Jake's birthday, is that today, Liam? Yesterday, okay. So happy birthday to Jake. We love the fact that Jake is with us, and we're happy to offer him birthday wishes. Andrea typed in about the Rad Love Manhattan Film Festival opening on Valentine's Day. It sounds like it was a wonderful gathering. And there are some pictures. Pam and Scott are celebrating Scott's father's 96th birthday, Stanley's birthday. Happy birthday to Stanley. As you read over the milestones and passages that are continuing to be entered into chat, I'm saddened to tell you that Timothy Edwards Sr. died on February 8th. Tim Sr. and his son, his beloved dog, and his son's girlfriend were some of the Middlebury unhoused community members living in the encampment behind Isley Library until the city removed it in December. Tim is the 5th unhoused neighbor in our community whom I have known to have died in the past 16 months. Those are more American deaths than I experienced in all but one combat deployment overseas tours in 27 years of a military career. As someone who had a relationship with Tim and the other neighbors, I consider their premature deaths an inexcusable and completely unnecessary tragedy and systemic moral failure. I'll be saying as much when I testify next week with our Vermont Interfaith Action colleagues in favor of Vermont's House Resolution 91, an attempt to adjust Vermont's emergency temporary shelter program to do more to help the vulnerable people in our community. please contact me if your spirit is being called to join any of our collective Unitarian Universalist justice efforts that center the needs of the most vulnerable neighbors in our community. Now I would like to turn it over to gifted teacher and our friend, Sensei Joshin Byrnes.
Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you. I was asked first to lead a brief meditation. And this is largely a silent meditation. In some ways, it's a meditation on silence. And so it might seem counterintuitive, but I'm going to ask you, if you feel comfortable, to unmute, actually, so we can hear in the silence each other's presence. And I'll guide with just a few words, with a bell at the beginning. Wherever you are, I invite you to relax, put your feet on the ground, allow your hands to rest on your lap, to feel your breath moving in your body. We're so often conditioned to think of noise as distraction. But I'd like to invite you to reconsider the sounds we hear, to fold them into the quiet rhythm of your breath, rising and falling. Just as we allow the breath to happen on its own, to let sound and sight and sensation to also happen on its own. We're often very quick to label a sound as pleasant or unpleasant. Sound of a car or a cough, we put in a different category than the sound of a bird or the wind. But consider them as equals. Sound being sound. In your awareness, let everything in. Nothing opposes you. Nothing is out of place. Nothing doesn't belong here. Using your imagination, consider the vast sounds of the world, the unseen lives moving around you, near and far, people working and resting, grieving, celebrating. and let them in. Consider all the two-leggeds and four-leggeds and six-leggeds and eight-leggeds, all the many living beings existing right here, right now. All the beings with roots and stems. And feel the quiet thread that connects you through oceans and forests and cities and deserts. The pulse of life in all places, being held in deep silence. Just take a moment to rest in that silence that welcomes everything and excludes nothing at all. Thank you, everyone. Excuse me. Just going to mute for a second while I clear my throat. Before I share some reflections, I'd like to offer a reading. And this is an ancient text from my Zen tradition by a Chinese master named Hongzhi from the 12th century. He was an important teacher and figure in the history of this particular branch of Zen, had a tremendous influence on a lot of generations following him. And it's from his teaching called Silent Illumination. Silent and still beyond words, a quiet clarity arises. When you reflect upon it, you expand. When you embody it, you are lifted. Alone, yet luminous, this inner light awakens wonder. Like moonlit dew, like stars on a clear river, like snow resting on pine branches or clouds wrapping the mountain peak, it is most radiant in darkness, most visible when unseen. Stillness cradles the dream of the crane, while distant waters flow toward the horizon. Time stretches open, and all things rest as one. In stillness, the mind is unburdened, and in illumination, even the smallest things shine. What is this wonder? Seeing clearly through confusion, the quiet heart is a lamp in the night. Light and shadow move together, neither separate nor opposed. When the moment is ripe, they meet and they dance, like branches bearing fruit in the turning of the seasons. Only silence speaks the deepest truth. Only illumination answers without words. Without effort, the world glistens and teaches without striving, and wisdom takes root. If light forgets stillness, it becomes restless and sharp. If stillness forgets light, it becomes heavy and lost. When silence and illumination embrace, the dreamer awakens, the lotus blooms, the many rivers return to the sea. All things, the seen and the unseen, move in harmony, without grasping, without striving. This is the great work, to simply be, to listen, to let silence reveal what words cannot. It's a beautiful, beautiful old text. I come back to it so often. I want to first of all thank all of you for having me here today. It's really lovely. I feel a kind of longing seeing you all, actually. I've been friends with many of you for a long, long time. And it's touching as I look at myself in the screen and look at all of you to see us all aging together and living our lives in community, and also to see the many newcomers here that I've not met. But it feels a little bit like a coming home for me to see your faces here, and I'm just grateful for the invitation to be here with you. And I wasn't expecting to doing this on Zoom, but as we all know, in the last 5 years or so, Zoom has become a kind of sacred space as well, a blessed place for reflection, being together. How grateful that this technology is developed. Amazing. And I'm feeling grateful for all the many people who have made this happen. And when Tom told me that this month's theme was radical inclusion, I wondered really what I could add to a topic that so many of you here I know have explored with such thought and heart and care. Inclusion is so essential, certainly as a nation, and perhaps even as a species. We struggle to live up to the ideal of radical inclusivity. Mystics and poets and politicians and spiritual leaders have spoken about this in one way or another for centuries. And yet, by the looks of things, we've not yet figured out how to fully embody it. So I, too, approach this topic with a really big dose of humility. Even in progressive spaces like the ones I am often in, and I think many of you are as well, when we experience rage or pain, our actions often resist radical inclusion. I come up against this in my own mind and heart, asking myself, how do I hold a space for those whose values I fundamentally oppose? How do we include those who we perceive as perpetuating harm in our sense of radical inclusion? Even those of us who espouse inclusivity sometimes find ourselves thinking, don't bring your MAGA hat in here, your transphobic rhetoric, your white supremacy, don't let it anywhere near me. Don't bring it into my backyard. It's a kind of values NIMBYism that we sometimes find ourselves engaging in. We instinctively set boundaries. Why is it so hard to live in radical inclusivity? Today, I want to bring some insights from the Zen tradition into this reflection and explore the contemplative dimensions that might serve as foundations for radical inclusivity. My words, like all words, of course, will undoubtedly fall short. They'll be incomplete as all words ultimately are. Zen recognizes this when it reminds us that words and letters are not the way. They're just a map, and a map is not the territory. And yet, paradoxically, I want to explore a fundamental ritual and practice of Zen as an expression of radical inclusivity. That fundamental ritual is silence. Silence not as absence, but as presence. Silence not as passivity, but as an active force. Silence not as mere soundlessness, but as harmony itself. For much of my own life, my relationship to silence was about some kind of level of emotional and psychological self-regulation and self-help, rather than the transformation of my sense of reality. What's going on here? As a sensitive little boy, I remember choosing silence rather than burst into tears at difficult moments. Since then, I've used silence to calm myself down. And like many, we use silence and stillness to manage our emotions or to start the day with peacefulness, to take a me moment in the middle of a busy workday, or to regain balance when we feel overwhelmed. I've used silence as a mindfulness technique to stabilize myself and to navigate my responsibilities and commitments of care. And this is kind of the common way we understand how to use silence in our contemporary secular mindfulness culture. As a Zen student, I've spent a lot of time in silence every day for the past 15 or 20 years. For nearly 10 years, I spent many hours a day, sometimes 8 days at a time, 7 or 8 times a year, sitting still in silent retreat. And often, when I would sit there in silence, usually facing a wall, as we do in silent retreat in our tradition, I'd find myself ranting a bit. The world is on fire. Why the heck am I doing this? How can I possibly spend these precious few moments of my life sitting here, doing nothing, being quiet, when there's so much there that needs to be done? For a while, I thought that sitting in silence was an act of preparation, to prepare myself to meet the chaos of the world, to meet it as a non-anxious presence in an anxious world, as a calming force, as medicine. And of course, this is true. However, my Zen teacher, who was tough, I gotta tell you, she used to cut right to the chase. And I was talking to her one day about my silent practice. And she said to me quite directly, "Joshin, Zen is not self-help. This isn't a self-help project. Get over it. It's not about creating moments of bliss or calm. It's not a means to some end." And of course, yes, we need to down-regulate our increasingly up-regulated nervous systems. But is that all there is to silence? In Zen practice, it's common to ask a student, why are you here? Why are you meditating? Where do you think you're going with all of this? And of course, the biggest Zen question of all, who do you think you are? Zen Master Dogen, who is the founder of our lineage of Zen, lived in the 13th century. We refer to him often. Dogen offers an answer to this question in a typical Zen way, roundabout, in one of his essays called the Genjo Koan. He says, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be penetrated by the 10,000 things of this world. When those 10,000 things become you and you become them, your mind and body, as well as the mind and body of others, all drop away." And this, I think, is at the heart of radical inclusivity. To reconstitute and to redefine who you think you are. To reconstitute and redefine the self, not as an isolated me, but as a vast and interwoven reality. Thich Nhat Hanh calls this interbeing. Traditional Zen speaks of seeing the intimacy of things. To see myself as other and other as myself is the foundation of radical inclusivity. So Dogen's words challenge us to study the way is to study the self, but to study that self is to forget the self, to forget it. And to forget it is to let everything in. And when everything comes in, you become it. And your body and mind and the body of minds of others, all the things that separate us from one another, they just drop away. And this transformation is not abstract. It's the work of reshaping how we understand selfhood itself. When we are no longer bound to a fixed and immovable identity, we open ourselves to true radical inclusivity, where boundaries soften and the divisions we cling to lose their grip. At the root of Zen practice is silence. It is in silence that we begin to see and embody this reality for ourselves. When asked a question like, "Who are you really?" by a teacher or encountered in one of the tradition's many mind-shattering koans, when we're asked this question, we are instructed then simply to sit with it, not to analyze it, not to journal about it, not to discuss it or explain it. We're directed to go back to the meditation cushion in silence. What is this silence? Why is silence, rather than words or ideas or scripture, the foundation of all-inclusive Zen? In culture and politics and in our intellect, inclusivity is often measured by what we say and how we say it. Ironically, many of our arguments and disagreements with each other stem from a shared desire for harmony. We fight to convince others to see things our way, believing that if we could just get everyone on the same page, we could finally live in peace. This happens in small ways, like when we argue with a family member over dinner, and in grand ways, like nations waging wars to impose their vision of order on others. But ultimately, we all want to live in harmony, but often with the conditions that others conform to our way of thinking. Words are so powerful. Dogen writes about loving speech in one of his other essays. He says words can turn the destiny of a nation. And of course, we have to speak words and even make noise to create a radically inclusive world. And yet, words can be overrated in the quest for spiritual insight, which abides at the root of all words and action. Where do noise and words and actions originate? Poets and mystics and artists and activists throughout history have pointed to silence, the uncreated, the undifferentiated, the unnamed and unnameable, as the source from which all noise and speech and action arise. Hildegard von Bingen, the great mystic and theologian and music theorist of her time, spoke of a cosmic music, a cosmic harmony, so radically inclusive and pervasive that we cannot even hear it. In it we live and we move and we have our being. And this kind of silence is not empty. It contains all things: the sound of birds, the hum of traffic, the cries of grief, the outrage of injustice, the laughter of children, the screams of agony, the songs of protest. Zen master Hongzhi describes silence as the field of boundless emptiness, an openness where all things arise and pass without obstruction. It's not a void, but an infinite space where nothing is included, in silence where nothing is excluded. In silence, we let go of the need to categorize and label and divide. We rest in awareness itself, where all voices, even those we resist, are present. Silence invites us into the vastness where there is no inside, no outside, no us, no them, only the great field where all things belong. He calls this the center of the circle of wonder. Silence is also a ritual of stopping. Stopping, Buddhism teaches us, is the third of four noble truths: the cessation of suffering. In a world where we're conditioned to react, to fight, to push forward, silence is an act of disruption. Words and arguments, protests and activism, all of these are vital, but they must come from a place where the idea of an other is dropped away. If not, they risk perpetuating the very divisions we seek to heal. I experienced this shift firsthand when I was arrested for civil disobedience a few years ago, protesting the separation of families at the US-Mexico border. As our nation put children in cages, I felt compelled to take action. But there was a palpable difference in this activism compared to my earlier experiences protesting during the AIDS epidemic. Back then, I protested with the belief that there was an objective enemy, an opponent to be shamed into submission. This time, however, I think my practice changed something in me. I wasn't engaging in civil disobedience against an enemy. Instead, I felt I was acting as part of a suffering world, where harmful karma had become so concentrated in this historical moment that it needed to be liberated in some way. I was not there to fight an opponent, but to meet the reality of suffering directly. I was there to, in some small and personal way, to set new healing karma in motion, not just for the families of the children being detained, but also for the ICE officers, the police who arrested me, and of course, for myself. In that moment, I saw that we are all equal in silence, bound together by radical inclusivity. So, in our endeavor to practice this radical inclusivity, perhaps it helps us to lean into radical silence, not as emptiness, but as boundless belonging, not as passivity, but as disruption, not as soundlessness, but as harmony in which all things belong. In silence, we're invited to be fully present, not withdrawing from the world, but meeting it without agenda, without defenses, without division. And this may be the starting point of healing action and of peacemaking. So my hope is that we, us, right here, and all beings everywhere, find ways to enter that silence together. May we find each other, all beings, leaving no one out, in the field of boundless possibility. And may we, in that silence, awaken to the one body, who we really are, which is not alone, but one with all beings in radical inclusivity. May it be so. All right, my friends, so I think it's my task to send us out with some words. Tom, right? Thumbs up? Okay. And I'll share these words, which when we were taking our family to the UU Church, both in Concord, Massachusetts, and in at CVUUS later on, we always closed service with these words that my family used to say every night at the dinner table, and still with my grandkids, we say them. So this is a bit in gratitude for my deep connection to UU communities and the UU tradition. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joshin. As I extinguish the chalice, please join me in reading these words. We extinguish the flame We extinguish this flame, remembering always to keep love at the center. Now I think we have some postlude music, and please do stay tuned. Remain here for our Zoom virtual social hour. Thank you, everyone.